In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And if you're unlucky enough to be really good at it, they scoop what's left of you into a metal box and make you do it forever. Hey, I'm your brother from the Void, and this is Tales from the Void. Today's story comes from inside a sarcophagus, 3,000 years inside a sarcophagus. This is the account of ancient Torvaeus, Venerable Dreadnought of the Ashen Wardens, a man who lost his body, his hands, his ability to run, and the simple feeling of air on his skin, and got a plasma reactor and an assault cannon in return. Fair trade, right? It's a story about what happens when you live long enough to watch everyone you've ever known die, multiple times over. About waking up every few decades to a number, how many brothers gone this time, and adding it to a sum that never stops growing. And about the one thing they never mention in the hagiographies, the dreaming, because they told him it would be dreamless. They lied. It's heavy, it's beautiful, and somewhere inside 3 meters of ceramite and adamantium, there's still a man who remembers what it felt like to run. Settle in. This is Tales from the Void. Let's begin. They never tell you about the dreaming. That is the first thing I want you to understand. Before anything else, before the wars and the glory and the 10,000 little indignities of being a coffin that walks, you need to understand what happens when they put you to sleep. Because they will tell you it is stasis. They will tell you it is dreamless, a gap, a nothing between one awakening and the next. The tech marines will recite their litanies and assure your brothers that the ancient rests in peace, suspended in the Emperor's grace, and every single word of it is a lie. You dream. Emperor, help you, you dream, and the dreams are worse than any battlefield I have ever known, because in the dreams I still have hands. My name is Torvaeus. Ancient Torvaeus, if you want to be formal about it, which everyone does, always, without exception, because apparently being entombed in 3 meters of ceramite and adamantium demands a certain level of ceremony that simply calling a man by his name cannot provide. I am a Venerable Dreadnought of the Ashen Wardens, successors of the Imperial Fists, guardians of the Carthane system, keepers of the Ember Gate, defenders of nothing in particular that has not already burned twice over in the last millennium. I have served the Emperor of Mankind for 3,217 Terran Standard Years, give or take a century. The imprecision is not for dramatic effect. I genuinely cannot remember anymore. Time does strange things when you spend most of it dead. Let me correct that. Not dead. Sleeping. There is a distinction, though it grows thinner with every waking. The Tech Marines are very particular about this distinction. Brother Torvaeus is not dead, they say. Brother Torvaeus is resting. Brother Torvaeus is in sacred repose. Brother Torvaeus is dreaming of victory and glory in the Emperor's name. Brother Torvaeus is a sack of organs floating in amniotic fluid inside an armored box the size of a generatorium. And if you could hear what Brother Torvaeus actually dreams about, you would never sleep again. But I am getting ahead of myself. You want to know what it is like, do you not? That is why you are listening. That is why the chroniclers and the historiators and the quill servitors are always scratching at the door of my sepulchre, begging the keeper of ancients for an audience. Everyone wants to know what it is like to be a dreadnought. They want the glory, the fury, the righteous fire of a warrior who fights beyond death itself. Even in death I still serve, they quote at me, as though I chose this, as though I woke up one morning in my old body, stretched my arms, my real arms, and thought, you know what would be wonderful? Being scooped out of my own ruined carcass and poured into a metal womb for the rest of eternity. Let me tell you what they never put in the recruitment scrolls. Let me tell you what daily life actually looks like when you are the chapter's most revered relic, its oldest living memory, its walking shrine, and its eternal prisoner all at once. It starts with the waking. There is no gentle transition, no soft emergence from sleep into consciousness the way it was when I had a body, when I could feel the rough weave of a cot beneath me, hear the distant rumble of the fortress monastery's void shields cycling through their dawn calibration. There is nothing, and then there is everything all at once, a flood of sensory data crashing through neural links that have been dormant for however long they decided to leave me this time. Auspex feeds, thermal imaging, acoustic sensors, atmospheric composition readouts, structural integrity monitors, ammunition counters, reactor temperature. I perceive the world through 17 different data streams before I even remember my own name, and for a few terrible seconds every single time, I do not know who I am. I am just a machine, just inputs and outputs, metal and ceramite, and the hum of a plasma reactor where my heart used to be. And then memory returns, not gently, not kindly, but like a bolter round to the skull. And I am Torvaeus again, and I wish I was not. That is not self-pity. I want to be clear about that. I am 3,000 years old. I have had my fill of self-pity. It lasted about a century and a half, and then I got over it, mostly because being bitter about your circumstances becomes tedious when those circumstances never change. No, the wish to not be Torvaeus is simpler than that. It is the wish to not remember. Because when the neural links fire, and the memory core boots and the engrams unspool in whatever is left of my brain, I remember things. I remember the weight of a bolter in hands that no longer exist. I remember the taste of Carthane's ash wind on a tongue I lost when the greenskin war boss tore me in half at the Battle of the Ember Gate. I remember running. Emperor's blood, I remember running. And if you have never lost the ability to run, you cannot possibly understand what it means to remember it. My Dreadnought chassis is many things. It is a weapon. It is a fortress. It is a symbol and a shrine. But it does not run. It walks ponderous and thundering, 3 meters of sanctified fury grinding forward at a pace that would embarrass a particularly aged Grox. I was fast once. In my early decades before I rose to captaincy, I was the fastest assault marine in the 3rd Company. I could cross a killing field in seconds, jump pack screaming, chainsword raised, the wind tearing at my face. Now I traverse the same distance with all the urgency of a cathedral on legs, and every step reminds me of what I was and what I am. But the Tech Marines do not know any of this. They see the optical sensors flare to life, the blood-red glow behind the sarcophagus viewport, and they bow. They always bow. Tech Marine Kale, the current keeper of Ancients, is young. He has served in this role for only 43 years, which means he has overseen perhaps 6 of my awakenings. To him, I am holy. I am the word of the Emperor made manifest in iron and fury. He does not see a crippled man trapped in a box. He sees a living reliquary, and when he bows, when he recites the litany of reawakening and anoints my chassis with sacred oils that I cannot feel, there is such genuine reverence in his movements that I would weep if I still could. The first thing I always say is the same, and it has become something of a tradition, which is to say, it has become a ritual, which is to say, it has become doctrine, which is to say, the Ashen Wardens have carved it into the wall of my sepulchre and treat it as holy writ. I say, "What year is it?" And they tell me, and I process the number. And I calculate how long I have been sleeping, and then I say, "How many?" And they know what I mean because they always know what I mean, even the new ones, because the old ones tell the new ones before they ever enter my chamber. He will ask how many, He means how many of us have died since his last waking. And then they tell me a number, and that number is always too high, and I add it to all the other numbers. And the sum of all those numbers is the true weight of this sarcophagus, heavier than any adamantium. This time, the number was 416. 416 Ashen Wardens, dead since my last waking. 4 full companies, give or take. Entire generations of warriors I will never know, whose names are carved into the wall of embers in the fortress monastery's great hall, whose deeds I will have to learn second-hand from the chapter's records because I was sleeping while they fought and bled and died. 416 brothers who lived their entire lives from initiation to death in the gap between 2 of my heartbeats. Because that is what it is, really. Each waking is a heartbeat, and the silence between them swallows everything. Tech Marine Kyle told me the number with the careful steadiness of a man delivering a wound. He watched my optical sensors for some response, some flicker of the grief he knew I must feel, but dreadnoughts do not have faces. We do not have expressions. We have a sarcophagus viewport that glows red, and a vox emitter that turns thought into sound, and the sound is always flat, always mechanical, always a poor translation of whatever storm is happening inside. So Kyle heard me say, "Noted," and he probably thought I was stoic. He probably thought I was strong, that 3 millennia of loss had forged me into something unbreakable. The truth is that I was screaming somewhere deep inside the amniotic fluid and the neural cables and the remnants of a body that was once tall and strong and whole. I was screaming. And the machine did not translate it because the machine does not know how to scream. Let me tell you about the body. What is left of it? I know you are curious. Everyone is curious. The young battle brothers pretend they are not, but I catch them staring at the sarcophagus, trying to imagine what is inside, and I can tell by the way they flinch when my vox emitter activates that they have imagined something terrible, and the terrible thing is that they are almost certainly right. I do not know exactly what remains of me. The last time anyone looked, and that was during a chassis transfer 800 years ago, when my original Mark IV body was damaged beyond repair, I was told that I was a torso, not even a full torso, a collection of organs held together by cybernetic augmentation and sheer theological stubbornness, suspended in amniotic fluid that is older than most planetary governors, fed through nutrient tubes, breathing through a rebreather that cycles the same recycled air through what is left of my lungs, which is not much. My brain is intact, or so they tell me. It is the only part of me that matters anymore, the only part that is still definitively Torvaeus rather than machine. Everything else is the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus is my body. The Dreadnought chassis is my skeleton, my muscles, my skin. The assault cannon is my right hand. The power fist is my left. The reactor is my heart, and it beats with a steady thrum that I feel in every fiber of my being, such as my being is, and some nights, in the moments before they put me back to sleep, I listen to that thrum and I try to remember what a real heartbeat sounded like, and I cannot. The daily routine of a Venerable Dreadnought, when one is actually awake, is surprisingly mundane. This disappoints people. They expect constant warfare, an endless parade of skull-crushing, heretic-burning, planet-shaking combat. And yes, there is combat. That is, after all, why they wake me. Nobody pulls a 3,000-year-old warrior out of sacred repose because they need advice on crop rotation or want to discuss the finer points of imperial architecture. They wake me because something is trying to kill us, and they need something older and angrier to kill it first. But between the waking and the killing, there is time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, and in that time there is the routine. It begins with the rites of maintenance. Tech Marine Kyle and his attendant servitors descend upon me like pilgrims at a shrine, which is exactly what they believe they are. The litany of the machine takes 47 minutes. I have counted. I have counted every single time for the last 800 years, not because I care about precision, but because counting is something to do while a man who genuinely believes your left knee joint is sacred applies consecrated lubricant to it with the solemnity of a priest administering last rites. 47 minutes of chanting, of incense that my atmospheric sensors detect, but I cannot smell, of oil that my pressure sensors register, but I cannot feel. The servitors check my ammunition feeds, my reactor seals, my neural link integrity. They run diagnostics that scroll across my internal display in columns of green and amber and occasional red that makes Kael's heart rate spike in a way my auspex finds almost endearing. Everything about this process is designed for the machine. Nothing is designed for the man inside it. I used to resent this. In the early centuries, when the memory of my body was still fresh and the phantom sensations still came in waves, I used to rage against the reduction of my existence to a maintenance schedule. I was a captain. I led the third company into the teeth of a wall that broke itself against the Ember Gate. And I did not fall until the war boss himself, a beast called Graktooth, whose skull now adorns the wall above my sepulchre, tore through my tactical Terminator armor with a power claw the size of a rhino transport. I was a warrior. I was a leader of warriors, and they reduced me to an inventory list. Assault cannon, operational. Power fist, operational. Sarcophagus life support, operational. Occupant, functional. Functional. Not alive, not well, not happy or sad or furious or grieving. Functional, like a cogitator, like a servitor, like a component. But I learned. 3,000 years is a long time to hold a grudge, even for a space marine, even for one of the Emperor's chosen, bred from the gene seed of Rogel Dorn himself, who I am told could hold a grudge with the best of them. I learned that the rites are not for me, they are for the chapter. When Kael anoints my chassis, he is not maintaining a machine, he is communing with his ancestry. I am the oldest living thread connecting the Ashen Wardens to their founding, to the days when the chapter was young and the Imperium was less broken, and every drop of oil, every whispered litany, every moment of reverence is a battle brother, reaching back through time to touch something that was there before him and will be there after him. I am their continuity. I am their memory. And if they need to treat me like a shrine to maintain that connection, then I will be a shrine, and I will endure the 47 minutes of knee-joint liturgy without complaint. After the rites comes the briefing. This is when the chapter master, or the ranking officer who has requested my waking, comes to my sepulchre and explains why I am no longer sleeping. It is always war. It is always death. It is always some new horror crawling out of the void to threaten whatever remains of the Imperium's fraying borders. But the way they explain it varies, and over 3 millennia, I have developed a taxonomy of the explanations that I find privately entertaining. There are the formal ones, usually delivered by chapter masters who have never spoken to me before and are terrified of saying the wrong thing to a walking relic. These briefings are long, overly detailed, drowning in honorifics and ritual language, and I have to resist the urge to tell them to get to the point, because apparently telling your chapter master to get to the point is considered disrespectful even when you are older than his entire bloodline. Then there are the practical ones, delivered by officers who have worked with me before and understand that I process tactical data faster than any mortal mind and do not need a 3-hour preamble about the glorious history of whatever campaign we are about to undertake. I prefer these. They are efficient, they respect my time, which is ironic, given that I have nothing but time, but the gesture is appreciated. And then there are the desperate ones. I have heard too many desperate briefings. They come from men whose voices carry the particular flatness of someone who has already accepted what is coming and is merely going through the motions of command because the alternative is to sit down and stop and let the weight of it crush them. I heard 1-3 wakings ago from a company captain named Valdris, who stood before me in armor still streaked with the blood of the previous engagement, and told me with that terrible calmness that the Tyranids had breached the inner fortifications of Carthage Secundus, and that the civilian population of the hive was being consumed alive. He did not embellish. He did not appeal to my duty or my honor. He simply laid out the numbers. 30 million souls, 3 days until total consumption, 1 company of Ashen Wardens between the swarm and what was left of the population. And then he asked me to fight, and I said yes, because that is what I always say, because that is all I can say, because what else would I say? No, I am a dreadnought. I am a weapon. Weapons do not refuse. I fought on Carthage Secundus for 11 days. 11 days of grinding, relentless, suffocating warfare against a Tyranid splinter fleet that had no name, no designation, just an endless tide of chitin and claw and hunger. The ground shook with each wave, and each wave was larger than the last, as if the hive mind was testing us, measuring our strength, calculating the precise amount of force needed to break us. I held the Magor breach for 3 days alone, my assault cannon harvesting Xenos by the 100, the barrel assembly rotating so fast it sang, a high-pitched whine that the brothers behind me later said sounded like a hymn, which I suppose is one way to describe the sound of 10,000 rounds per minute shredding organic matter into a mist that painted my chassis in Xenos viscera and made the ground beneath my feet slick with alien death. I killed until my assault cannon barrels glowed white and the ammunition feeds ran dry, and then I killed with the power fist, swatting Jean's stealers and hormagaunts like insects, crushing warrior organisms beneath my feet, tearing through the chitinous mass of a carnifex with a fury that was not programming, was not tactical doctrine, was not the cold calculation of a machine, but was rage, pure and human and ancient. The rage of a man who remembers what it was to be whole and channels all the grief of his broken existence into the singular, devastating act of violence. The Carnifex came at me through the breach like a living battering ram, 3 tons of bioengineered killing machine with scything talons that could peel open a land raider, and I met it head-on, power fist against organic blade, ceramite against chitin, and the impact was so violent that the ferrocrete beneath us cracked and the wall on either side of the breach buckled outward. I drove it back. Step by grinding step, I drove it back through the breach, my reactor screaming, my servos straining, the amniotic fluid in my sarcophagus vibrating with the force of each blow. And I thought of nothing, felt nothing, was nothing except the act, the pure, primal, beautiful act of one thing, pushing back against another thing. And in that moment, the machine and the man were one, fused by violence into something that was neither, and both. And the Carnifex died with my power, fist buried in its skull up to the elbow joint, and I stood in the breach with its corpse at my feet, and the hive behind it recoiled, just for a moment, just long enough for the brothers behind me to seal the gap. And I thought, this is what I am for. We saved 11 million. 19 million died. Captain Valdris was among them, dissolved by bioacid in the final hours when a Tyrannofex breached the inner wall and caught his squad in the open. I watched it happen through my optical sensors, processed the image in 4.7 milliseconds, and could do nothing because I was 200 meters away and my chassis does not run. I walked. I walked as fast as the servos would carry me. and I arrived in time to see the acid finish its work, to see the last recognizable fragment of Valdris's armor dissolve into nothing, and to kill the Tyrannofex with a blow that cracked its skull wide open and splattered its alien brain across the ferrocrete in a pattern that my tactical cogitator, with characteristic inappropriateness, identified as roughly symmetrical. After Carthane Secundus, they put me back to sleep. I did not resist. Sleep is mercy when you are a dreadnought. Sleep is the only escape from a body that is not a body, from a world experienced through sensors that give you everything except the things that matter. You want to know the cruelest detail of my existence? I can detect the chemical composition of the air in my sepulcher down to parts per billion. I can identify every element, every compound, every trace gas. But I cannot smell it. My sensors tell me that the incense the Tech Marines burn is composed of certain organic compounds and aromatic hydrocarbons. They do not tell me what it smells like. They do not tell me if it is sweet or bitter or sharp. They give me data where there should be experience, and there is a difference between knowing that something is beautiful and feeling that it is beautiful, and that difference is the width of a sarcophagus wall, and it is infinite. But this time, this waking was different. This time, something changed. They woke me on the 7th day of the Carthan autumn, if autumn is the right word for a planet whose seasons are measured in ash density rather than temperature. Tekmarine Kael performed the rites as he always does, his servo arms delicately manipulating the sacred tools while his human hands made the sign of the cog over my sarcophagus. The servitors ran their diagnostics. The incense burned. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. And then the briefing began, and it was not the chapter master who delivered it. It was a chaplain. Chaplain Morcrest, a name I knew from the chapter records, but had never heard spoken aloud, which meant he had risen to his rank during one of my sleeping periods. He was tall, even for an Astartes, and his skull helm was ancient, one of the original pieces from the chapter's founding, passed down through 37 chaplains before him. I knew this because I had known the first one. I had known Chaplain Verin, who had worn that helm when the Ashen Wardens were 100 brothers strong, and the galaxy was a marginally less terrible place. And seeing it on a stranger's head was one of those small, sharp losses that accumulate over millennia until you are drowning in them. Morcrest did not bow. That was the first thing I noticed. Every other chaplain I have known, and I have known 19 of them, bowed when they entered my presence. It is protocol. It is tradition. It is frankly polite, considering that I am older than their chapter's history and have earned a certain baseline of deference. But Morcrest stood straight, skull helm tilted slightly upward as though he were examining me, assessing me, and his posture carried something I had not seen directed at me in a very long time. Suspicion. He said, "Ancient Torvaeus, I am Chaplain Morcrest. I need you to listen carefully to what I am about to tell you, and I need you to answer me truthfully, because the fate of this chapter may depend upon your answer." And I thought, well, this is new. Let me pause here to explain something about chaplains and dreadnoughts, because the relationship is more complicated than the hagiographies suggest. Chaplains are the keepers of a chapter's spiritual health. They guard against doubt, heresy, corruption, and despair. They are the chapter's conscience, its moral compass, its enforcers of faith. Dreadnoughts, on the other hand, are the keepers of a chapter's memory. We are its living history, its continuity, its proof that the past was real and that the battles fought and the sacrifices made were not in vain. In theory, these roles are complementary. In practice, they sometimes conflict, because memory and faith do not always agree, and a man who remembers how things actually happened is sometimes inconvenient to a man whose job is to ensure that everyone believes things happened the way the doctrine says they did. I have had disagreements with chaplains before. Chaplain Aerith, who served during my 8th waking century, once asked me to confirm a particular version of the Battle of the Ember Gate that cast the chapter master of that era in a considerably more heroic light than my memory supported. I told him the truth. He did not ask me again. But these were small frictions, manageable, buried under centuries of shared purpose. Morcrest was different. Morcrest was not asking me to confirm a story. He was asking me something that I did not yet understand, and the suspicion in his stance told me that whatever it was, my answer carried consequences. "Ancient," he said, "what do you remember of the Founding?" And that, as they say on Carthane, is when the Ashwind changed direction. The Founding, our founding. The creation of the Ashen Wardens from the gene seed of the Imperial Fists, in an age when the Imperium still believed that new chapters could shore up its crumbling borders. I was there. I am the only one left who was there. Every other soul who stood in the great hall of the Phalanx when the Lord Commander himself presented the gene seed and the charter, and the name was dead, long dead, dust and memory and carved names on a wall that most living wardens have never even read. I was the last, the only, and Morcrest wanted to know what I remembered. The answer was, less than I should. Memory in a dreadnought is not like memory in a living brain. It degrades, not quickly, not obviously, but steadily, like erosion, like the slow wearing of stone by wind. The oldest memories are the most affected, and the Founding was the oldest memory I had. I remembered fragments, images, sounds, the weight of the chamber, the golden light filtering through armor glass viewports, the voice of a man whose face I could no longer see, speaking words I could no longer hear, bestowing a name and a purpose on a brotherhood that did not yet know what it would become. I remembered standing among my brothers, still whole, still young, still wearing the yellow of the Imperial Fists, and feeling something that might have been pride or might have been fear, because neither emotion was permitted and both were present, as they always are in every Space Marine who has ever lived, no matter what the propaganda says. I told Morcrest this. I told him that my memories of the Founding were fragmentary, degraded by millennia of stasis cycles and the inevitable entropy of organic neural tissue suspended in amniotic fluid. I told him I could provide partial recollections, but that they would be incomplete, possibly inaccurate, and should not be treated as authoritative historical record. He said, "I am not interested in history, Ancient. I am interested in one specific detail. During the founding ceremony, were there representatives of the Inquisition present?" And the question hit me like a power fist, because suddenly I understood what Morcrest was really asking, and suddenly the suspicion in his posture made terrible, terrible sense. Let me tell you what I knew then, what I understood in that moment, as the implications cascaded through my cogitator-enhanced consciousness with all the subtlety of a demolition charge. The Inquisition's presence at a chapter founding was not unusual. It was, in fact, standard procedure. The Ordo maintained oversight of all new chapter creations, ensuring the purity of gene seed, the orthodoxy of doctrine, the loyalty of the new brotherhood to the Golden Throne. Their presence was expected, documented, unremarkable. The question was not whether they were there. The question was why Morcrest needed to ask, because the answer should have been in the chapter's records, in the archives, in the 10,000 documents and scrolls and data crystals that chronicled every moment of the Ashen Wardens' existence from founding to present day. If Morcrest was asking me, it meant the records did not contain this information. And if the records did not contain this information, it meant someone had removed it. And if someone had removed it, then there was a secret at the heart of the Ashen Wardens that someone wanted to keep buried, and I was the only living witness who might remember what it was. The answer to his question was yes. There were inquisitorial representatives at the founding. I remembered them. Not clearly, not in detail, but I remembered the black rosettes, the cold authority, the way the other officers gave them space, the way water gives space to stone. There had been 2 of them, or 3. The memory flickered like a damaged Pict feed. 2, certainly, perhaps 3. And one of them had spoken to me afterward in the corridor outside the great chamber, and had said something that I could not remember, something that hovered at the edge of recall, like a word on the tip of a tongue I no longer possessed. I told Morcrest, "Yes, there were inquisitors at the founding." He was silent for a long time. Dreadnoughts perceive silence differently than flesh and blood warriors. For me, silence is not empty. Silence is the absence of vox input layered over the constant background noise of my own systems. The hum of the reactor, the cycling of the air recycler, the low whine of the neural interface, the soft liquid pulse of the amniotic fluid that cradles what is left of me. Silence for a dreadnought is paradoxically the loudest thing there is, because it forces you to listen to yourself, and listening to yourself when yourself is a machine is an exercise in existential horror that I do not recommend. When Morcrest finally spoke, his voice had changed. The suspicion was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something that my emotional analysis subroutines, which are crude and imprecise, and were never designed for the complexities of Astar Tess psychology, flagged as fear. He said, "Ancient, I need you to come with me. There is something in the lower vaults that you need to see." And that is how the longest day of my 3,000-year existence began. Not with a battle cry, not with the thunderous opening of a drop pod, not with the righteous fury of a warrior descending upon the Emperor's enemies. It began with a chaplain who was afraid, and a question about the past, and the slow, grinding walk of a coffin on legs through corridors that were ancient when I was young, toward a secret that I had been sleeping above for longer than most civilizations endure. But before I tell you what was in those vaults, I need to tell you about the walk. Because the walk is where you understand what it really means to be a dreadnought, and the walk is where the daily life part of this account becomes most real, most mundane, most crushingly ordinary, despite the extraordinariness of my existence. A dreadnought walks at approximately 4 kilometers per hour on level ground. This is not fast. This is, in fact, agonizingly slow by the standards of the Adeptus Astar Tess, whose baseline running speed exceeds 30 kilometers per hour and whose assault marines can cross a battlefield in seconds with a burst from their jump packs. 4 kilometers per hour. Walking pace for a baseline human. Slower than some elderly citizens on Carthane's habitation decks. I am a weapon of war that moves at the speed of a pensioner, and every corridor of the fortress monastery was designed for space marines in power armor, not for 3-meter-tall walking tanks, which means that every doorway is a negotiation, every staircase is an impossibility. Every narrow passage is a reminder that this fortress was not built for what I have become. The walk from my sepulchre to the lower vaults took 43 minutes. 43 minutes of grinding servos and thundering footsteps, and the particular scraping sound that a power fist makes against a stone wall when you misjudge a corner, which I did twice, because my spatial awareness in confined spaces is not what it could be, and the fortress monastery's architects did not anticipate a dreadnought navigating the sublevels. 43 minutes of Chaplain Morcrest walking beside me in silence, his stride adjusted to match my pace, his skull helm turned forward, his thoughts hidden behind ceramite and ceremony. 43 minutes of servitors and menials and junior battle brothers pressing themselves against walls as I passed, some bowing, some making the sign of the Aquila. one dropping a tray of bolter components with a clatter that my acoustic sensors registered at 67 decibels and which Morcrest ignored with the practiced indifference of a man who has more important things to worry about than dropped ammunition. During those 43 minutes, I had time to think. This is the curse and the gift of being a dreadnought. You always have time to think. My cogitator processes tactical data at speeds that would burn out a mortal brain. My neural interface feeds me a constant stream of environmental information that keeps me anchored to the present moment in ways that the sleeping mind cannot achieve. But underneath all of that, in the quiet spaces between data packets and diagnostic cycles, there is the thinking, the endless, circular, inescapable thinking that is the true prison of the sarcophagus. Not the metal, not the amniotic fluid, not the loss of sensation or mobility or the ability to feel the sun on your face. The prison is the thinking, because the thinking never stops, and when you have been alive for 3,000 years and lost everything that made life worth living except the ability to contemplate the loss, the thinking becomes a labyrinth with no exit, and you walk its corridors forever, just as I walk the corridors of this fortress, slowly, grinding, going somewhere, but never arriving anywhere that matters. I thought about the founding. I tried to access those degraded memories, tried to sharpen them, tried to pull detail from the blur the way a tech marine might salvage data from a corrupted cogitator. But memory does not work that way, especially not in a dreadnought, especially not after 3,000 years. The founding remained what it was: fragments, impressions, ghosts of ghosts. I remembered the Inquisitors. I remembered their rosettes. I remembered one of them speaking to me, and I could almost hear the voice, almost make out the words, and the almost was maddening, like an itch in a limb that does not exist, like the phantom sensation of fingers closing around a hilt that is not there. And I thought about Morcrest's fear. A chaplain afraid, that alone was significant. Chaplains are not supposed to fear. They are the embodiment of the chapter's faith, the warriors who stand at the boundary between devotion and doubt, and hold the line with the force of their conviction. If Morcrest was afraid, then whatever waited in the lower vaults was something that threatened not just the chapter's safety, but its identity, its very understanding of itself. And that, for a Space Marine chapter, is a wound more grievous than any bolt shell or Xenos claw. We reached the lower vaults at the 43-minute mark. I know this because my internal chronometer logged it, and I know the exact second because that was the moment my thermal sensors detected something they should not have detected. Heat. The lower vaults of the fortress monastery are deep, carved into the bedrock of Carthane's primary continent, insulated by millions of tons of stone and volcanic glass. They are cold. They have always been cold. The chapter stores its most ancient relics there, its gene seed reserves, its sealed archives, all kept at temperatures that slow decay and preserve the fragile treasures of 3 millennia. But my sensors were reading heat, not much, a few degrees above baseline, enough to be anomalous, enough to be wrong. Morcrest stopped at a door. It was old, older than me, which meant it predated the chapter itself, which meant it was part of the original structure that the Ashen Wardens had inherited when they claimed Carthane as their homeworld. The door was marked with symbols that I did not recognize, which was unusual because I recognize most Imperial symbols, and these were not Imperial. They were something else, something older. The metal of the door was dark, almost black, and it seemed to absorb the light from Morcrest's helmet lamp rather than reflect it, which my optical analysis subroutines flagged as physically inconsistent with any known alloy. Morcrest turned to me. His vox emitter crackled with the slight distortion that indicates a chaplain switching to his private frequency, the one encrypted for senior officers only. He said, Ancient, what I am about to show you has been kept from every dreadnought who has served in this chapter's history. It has been kept from every chapter master who has served less than a full century. It is the oldest secret of the Ashen Wardens, and I am breaking 3,000 years of silence by bringing you here. I am doing this because I have no choice. Something has changed. Something has woken up down here, and we do not know what it is. And the records say that you were there when it was put to sleep. And I looked at that door, that black, light-eating door, and somewhere in the damaged archive of my memory, something stirred, not a full recollection, not even a fragment, just a feeling, an echo of a sensation from a body I no longer possessed, and the feeling was cold. Deep, marrow-cracking cold, the kind that seeps through power armor and transhuman physiology, and tells you on a level more primal than conscious thought that you are in the presence of something that should not be. I said, "Open it." And Morcrest opened the door, and behind it was the thing that had been sleeping beneath us for 3,000 years, and in that moment, everything I thought I knew about the Ashen Wardens, about our founding, about my own interment, about the very reason I existed as what I was, crumbled like ash in the wind of my homeworld. And I understood, finally, why they had never let me see this before. Behind the door was a chamber. Not large, perhaps 20 meters square, carved from the same volcanic basalt as the rest of the lower vaults, but lined with something else, a dark, crystalline material that my spectral analysis sensors immediately identified with a jolt of recognition. Blackstone, noctilith, the same substance that had formed the great pylons of lost Cadia, the ancient Xenos-wrought pillars that had held the Eye of Terror in check for millennia before the Despoiler's final crusade shattered the world and the pylons with it. The walls were covered in script, dense, spiraling lines of text in a language I recognized dimly from briefings I had received lifetimes ago. Aeldari runes, old ones, older than the Craftworlds, older perhaps than the Fall itself, and they were glowing faintly with a phosphorescent light that shifted between blue and white in a rhythm that my pattern recognition algorithms identified as breathing. In the center of the chamber, rising from the floor like a spear driven into the earth, was a pylon. Smaller than the great pylons of Cadia, perhaps 4 meters tall, but unmistakably the same technology, the same angular black crystal, the same faint thrumming that my sensors registered as a subsonic vibration just below the threshold of human hearing. At its base, embedded in the noctilith like an eye in a skull, was a spirit stone, Aeldari, far larger than any battlefield recovery I had seen in field reports, easily the size of a human head, less a personal waystone than a reservoir of psychic energy, and it was glowing with a soft amber light that pulsed in time with the thrumming, and it was warm. My thermal sensors confirmed what I had detected from the corridor. The warmth was emanating from this stone, from this Xenos relic that had been buried beneath the Ashen Wardens' fortress monastery for longer than our chapter had existed, and it was getting warmer. I stared at it through optic feeds that had witnessed the death of worlds, and I felt something that I had not felt in centuries. Recognition, not of the pylon itself, but of the feeling it provoked. That deep, instinctive cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the awareness that you are standing at the edge of something vast and incomprehensible and older than your capacity to understand. I had felt this before, once, at the founding. The memory came then, not gradually, not in fragments, but all at once, like a dam breaking. Like the sudden, violent release of something that had been held back by millennia of degradation and the deliberate, systematic suppression of a truth that someone had decided I should not be allowed to keep. The founding, the ceremony, the inquisitors with their black rosettes. And after the ceremony, in the corridor, One of them had stopped me, had placed a hand on my pauldron, the yellow of the imperial fists still bright on the ceramite, and had spoken to me in a voice that carried the particular flatness of someone delivering information they would prefer to withhold. She said, "You are Torvaeus. You will lead the Third Company." I said, "I will, Inquisitor." She said, "There is something beneath the fortress on Carthane, something that was there before the colony, before the first human settlement, before anything. It was sealed by the first expedition that discovered it, and it has remained sealed ever since. Your chapter has been created in part to guard it. Not all of your brothers know this. Not all of your brothers will. You are being told because the Ordo believes in contingencies, and you are a contingency. Remember this. Remember what I have told you, and if the seal ever breaks, if the thing beneath the fortress ever stirs, you must act. You will know what to do." And I had said, "What is it?" And she had said, "We do not know. That is why it must be guarded." 3,000 years. 3,000 years of sleeping and waking, of war and loss, of 416 dead brothers and 19 million consumed civilians, and the endless, grinding march of a coffin through corridors that were never built for it. And all of that time, this had been here, beneath me, beneath all of us. The reason for our existence, the secret purpose of the Ashen Wardens, hidden from all but a handful of chapter masters, and one Inquisitor who was almost certainly dead, and one Dreadnought whose memory had been slowly, naturally, mercifully eroding the knowledge away. They had not needed to suppress my memories. Time had done it for them. The stasis cycles, the degradation, the entropy of 3 millennia had worn the Inquisitor's words down to a feeling, a ghost, a cold spot in the map of my consciousness that I had never examined too closely because something, some instinct or some implanted compulsion, had always steered me away. Until now. Until Morcrest opened the door and the memory came flooding back, and I stood in that chamber, 3 meters of ceramite and fury, and the shattered remains of a man named Torvaeus. And I understood that I was not just a warrior preserved beyond death. I was a watchman, a sentinel, a failsafe built into the foundations of a chapter whose true mission had nothing to do with the orcs or the tyrannids or the 1,000 other enemies we had fought and bled against for 3 millennia, but was this chamber, this thing, this sleeping enigma beneath the stone. Morcrest watched me process this. He could not see my face. Nobody can see my face. But he could hear my reactor cycle spike, could see my power fist clench and unclench in a reflexive motion that I was not consciously controlling, and he understood, because chaplains understand bodies, even when those bodies are made of metal. He said, "You remember." I said, "I remember." He said, "It has been getting warmer for 6 months. The Auspex readings are changing. The runes on the walls have started to shift, rearranging themselves. The Tech Marines cannot explain it. The librarians say they can feel something stirring in the warp, something old, something that is not hostile but is not friendly either, something that is simply waking up the way you wake up, ancient, slowly, and then all at once. And the Chapter Master Dravion, he has been trying to contact the Inquisition, trying to reach the Ordo Xenos, trying to get guidance, and there has been no response. No response in 6 months. We are alone with this, and you are the only one who was there when it was sealed, and the Inquisitor told you that you would know what to do. And the worst part, the truly terrible part, the part that would have made me laugh if I still had the anatomy for laughter, was that the Inquisitor had been wrong. I did not know what to do. I had no secret instructions, no hidden protocol, no divine revelation waiting in the depths of my degraded memory to illuminate the path forward. The Inquisitor had placed her faith in a contingency that was, in the end, just a man. A broken man in a box. A man whose memories were riddled with gaps like bolt rounds through a bulkhead, and whose body was a collection of organs in fluid, and whose greatest daily accomplishment was not going mad from the monotony of existence. She had looked at me 3,000 years ago and seen a warrior, a leader, a captain of space marines, and she had trusted me with the most dangerous secret on Carthane. And 3,000 years later, all that remained of that trust was a feeling of cold and a profound, helpless uncertainty. I did not tell Morcrest this. A Venerable Dreadnought does not confess helplessness. It is not in the programming, and it is not in the character, and even after 3 millennia of loss and degradation and the slow stripping away of everything that made me human, I still had my pride. So I said what a dreadnought is supposed to say in moments of crisis. I said, "Gather the senior officers, summon the librarius, wake the other ancients. We must deliberate." And Morcrest said, "There are no other ancients, Torvaeus. You are the last. Ancient Corvin was destroyed at Carthane Secundus. Ancient Dridus was lost in the void during the Mortavian campaign. You are the only dreadnought the Ashen Wardens have left. The only one. In 3,000 years, the Ashen Wardens had interred 43 of their greatest heroes in dreadnought sarcophagi. 43 warriors preserved beyond death to serve the chapter in its darkest hours. And of those 43, 42 were gone. Destroyed in combat, lost to mechanical failure, consumed by the slow decay of systems that the Mechanicus could no longer fully maintain, or simply driven mad by the centuries of isolation and put to rest by the mercy of the chapter's apothecaries. 42 brothers, each one a universe of memory and experience and knowledge, gone. And I remained, the last ancient, the only living thread connecting the Ashen Wardens to their past, and now, apparently, the only being who had any knowledge of their deepest secret. This is the part of the story where I am supposed to describe a moment of heroic resolve. The part where the ancient warrior, faced with impossible odds and terrible knowledge, straightens his metal spine and declares his intention to face the darkness with the Emperor's name on his lips and fury in his reactor. And I will not lie to you, I did feel something like resolve. It was buried deep beneath the grief and the confusion and the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has been fighting for 3,000 years and wants nothing more than to sleep and never wake up. But it was there. It is always there. That is what being an Astartes means. Even an Astartes reduced to organs in a jar. The resolve is in the gene seed. It is in the conditioning. It is in the marrow of bones I no longer possess. You can take away my body, my senses, my memories, my brothers, my chapter's innocence, and the resolve remains, stubborn and immovable as the walls of the Imperial Palace, because Rogel Dorn built those walls, and Rogel Dorn built me. And what Dorn builds does not break. I said, show me everything. Every reading, every record, every scrap of data you have on this chamber, and whatever is inside that spirit stone. And summon Chapter Master Dravion. If we are to face this, we face it as wardens, not as frightened children hiding from the dark. Morcrest nodded, and for the first time since he had entered my sepulchre, I saw his posture change. The suspicion was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something that I recognized because I had seen it in the eyes of brothers who stood beside me 3,000 years ago, when the galaxy was younger and the enemies were simpler and the faith was not yet frayed. It was hope. The fool had hope. He looked at me, a crippled relic in a metal box, the last of my kind, my memories crumbling and my body rotting and my knowledge useless. And he felt hope, because that is what dreadnoughts are for. Not for killing, not really. Any weapon can kill. Dreadnoughts exist to give hope. We are the proof that the worst thing that can happen to a warrior has happened, and that warrior is still fighting. We are the chapter's stubborn refusal to accept defeat, made manifest in ceramite and iron. And when a brother looks at me and sees hope, I cannot bring myself to disillusion him, even when the hope is built on a foundation of rust and forgetting. I will tell you what we found in the data. I will tell you what the librarians sensed, and what the tech marines measured, and what Chapter Master Dravion decided. But first, I want to tell you about the walk back from the lower vaults, because it was during that walk that I had the conversation that changed everything, and it was not a conversation with Morcrest or Dravion or any living soul. It was a conversation with myself. The fortress monastery's corridors were quiet at that hour. The night cycle had begun, and the menials had retreated to their dormitories, and the battle brothers not on watch were in their cells, resting or praying or engaging in the quiet, solitary activities that space marines pursue when the killing stops and the silence begins. I walked alone, Morcrest having gone ahead to summon the chapter master, and the only sounds were my footsteps, each one a small earthquake, each one a reminder of my weight, my mass, my immovable, inescapable presence in a world that had not been designed for me. And I thought about Torvaeus. Not ancient Torvaeus, the Venerable Dreadnought, the walking relic, the chapter's oldest memory. I thought about Torvaeus, the man, the captain, the assault marine who could cross a killing field in seconds, the warrior who had stood in the great hall of the phalanx and received the gene seed of a new chapter and felt pride and fear in equal measure. I thought about his face, which I could no longer visualize. I thought about his voice, his real voice, not the synthesized crackle of a vox emitter, but the actual sound that came from an actual throat and was shaped by actual lips and carried the actual inflections of a man who had loved and feared and doubted and hoped. I could not remember it. I could not remember my own voice. 3,000 years, and the sound of my own speech was gone, overwritten by the machine, replaced by a facsimile that everyone else treated as real because they had never heard the original. And I asked myself a question that I had been avoiding for centuries. Am I still Torvaeus? Or am I the machine that remembers being Torvaeus? Is there a difference? And if there is, which one is the Dreadnought? I do not have an answer. I have never had an answer. The chaplains would say that the soul endures, that the Emperor's light shines in me as it shines in all his servants, that the flesh is merely a vessel and the spirit is eternal. The tech marines would say that the machine is the body and the body is sacred, and the distinction between organic and mechanical is a heresy of perspective. The apothecaries would say that I am, biologically speaking, alive, and that alive is alive regardless of the container. And I would say, if I were being honest, if I were speaking to someone who would not be devastated by the admission, that I do not know, that I have been asking this question for 3 millennia, and the answer changes every time I wake up, and that some wakings I am Torvaeus, and some wakings I am the machine, and most wakings I am something in between, something that has no name and no precedent, something that is neither man nor weapon, but a new thing, a third thing, forged in the space between death and duty, and I do not know if that thing has a soul or a purpose or a future beyond the next battle, and the uncertainty is the heaviest thing I carry, heavier than the chassis, heavier than the power fist, heavier than 3,000 years of accumulated grief. But I kept walking. That is the lesson, if there is a lesson. I kept walking. The Dreadnought kept walking. Whatever I am, it kept walking. Through the corridors of the fortress monastery, past the shrines and the armories, and the sealed doors of brothers who would never open them again, toward the next crisis, the next impossible burden, the next moment of truth in a life that is measured not in years, but in wakings. each one a small resurrection, each one a small death, each one a step in a journey that has no destination except forward. Chapter Master Dravion was waiting for me in the Strategium. He was a large man, even by Astar Tess standards, broad-shouldered and heavy-jawed, with the scarred, weathered look of a warrior who had spent more time in combat than in command, and who treated the latter as an unfortunate necessity imposed upon him by the former. I had known 3 chapter masters during my waking periods. Dravion was the third, and I liked him best, for the simple reason that he did not treat me as a deity. He treated me as a senior officer who happened to be entombed in a walking tank, which was the closest anyone had come to treating me as a person in about 700 years. Dravion did not waste time. He activated the holo display, and the chamber beneath us was rendered in flickering green light, rotating slowly, every surface mapped by deep penetrating Auspex scans that the Tech Marines had been running since the anomaly was first detected. The pylon at the center of the chamber was highlighted in amber. The Spirit Stone's increasing thermal output tracked across a 6-month timeline that showed a steady, accelerating curve upward. The Aeldari runes on the walls were displayed in a separate feed, and I could see what Morcrest had described. The symbols were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving, rearranging themselves in patterns that the cogitators could not decode and the librarians could not interpret. Dravion said, "What are we looking at, Torvaeus?" And I told him what I knew, what the Inquisitor had told me, what the memory, newly recovered, contained. I told him about the seal, about the secret purpose of the chapter, about the thing beneath the fortress that predated human settlement. I told him that the Inquisitor had said I would know what to do, and I told him, because I owed him honesty, that I did not. Dravion absorbed this with the stoicism of a man who has been chapter master long enough to know that the universe's cruelties are not limited by imagination. He studied the holo display for a long time. Then he said, "The librarians have been studying the warp signatures around the chamber. They say it is not chaos. They say it is Xenos, Aeldari, or something close to it, but older than any Craftworld signature they have encountered, pre-imperial, ancient beyond reckoning. And they say it is not hostile. Arction's people have confirmed that the object at the pylon's base is a spirit stone, a soul vessel of the Aeldari, and that whatever consciousness resides within it is aware and growing stronger." "Not hostile yet," Morcrest added from across the Strategium. Dravion ignored him. He said, "We have 2 options, as I see it. We seal the chamber more thoroughly than it has ever been sealed and pray that whatever is inside goes back to sleep. Or we activate the Spirit Stone and find out what we have been guarding for 3 millennia." I looked at the holo display. I looked at the thermal curve, steady and relentless and accelerating. I looked at the shifting runes, ancient and incomprehensible and alive. And I made a calculation. Not a tactical calculation, not a strategic one, but a simple, practical assessment based on 3,000 years of experience with things that do not want to stay sealed. Seals break. Containment fails. Things that are waking up do not stop waking up because you pile more stone on top of them. I had fought tyrannids that burrowed through 3 kilometers of solid rock to reach a biomass concentration. I had fought orcs that disassembled a void shield generator from the inside using nothing but their teeth and an unreasonable amount of enthusiasm. I had fought chaos, which does not recognize the concept of containment at all. Whatever was stirring inside that spirit stone was going to manifest, whether we activated it or not. The only question was whether we met it on our terms or its. I said, "Open it." Dravion looked at Morcrest. Morcrest looked at Dravion. There was a moment, brief and tense, where the decision hung in the air between them like a bolt, round at the apex of its arc, and then Dravion nodded, and Morcrest did not object, and the decision was made, and the Ashen Wardens committed themselves to a course of action that would either save the chapter or end it. And I, the walking coffin, the last ancient, the contingency that an inquisitor had planned 3,000 years ago, would be there to see it through. The preparations took 2 days. 2 days of assembling the chapter's leadership in the strategium, of briefing company captains who had never heard of the lower vault, of watching their faces cycle through disbelief, anger, fear, and finally the grim acceptance that is the Astartes' native emotional state. 2 days of the librarians conducting psychic surveys of the chamber, their minds brushing against the edges of whatever consciousness lingered within the spirit stone, retreating each time with reports that were maddeningly vague. "It is aware," said Chief Librarian Arcteon, a thin, intense man whose psychic hood cast shifting shadows across his pale features. "Whatever is inside that stone knows we are here. It is not afraid, and it is curious. Curious. An ancient Aeldari consciousness sealed in a spirit stone beneath a space marine fortress monastery for millennia. And it was curious. I found this both reassuring and deeply troubling, because curiosity implies intelligence, and intelligence implies agency, and agency implies the capacity for decisions, and not all decisions are benign. During those 2 days, I learned something else about Morcrest. The chaplain visited me each evening after the strategic sessions concluded and the other officers retired to their cells. He would stand before my sarcophagus in the strategium, skull helm removed, his face bare, and he would talk. Not about the chamber, not about strategy or doctrine or the fate of the chapter. He talked about the brothers, the ones he had lost, the ones whose faith he had shepherded through darkness and despair, whose last confessions he had heard, whose eyes he had closed. He talked about a brother named Serax, who had died on the walls of Carthane Tertius 2 decades ago, holding a breach against a horde of cultists for 18 hours with a shattered bolter and a combat knife, singing the canticle of endurance with every breath until the breath stopped. He talked about a scout named Velen, who had taken his vows only months before being killed by a stray round during a training exercise, an accident so senseless, so utterly devoid of glory or meaning that Morcrest still struggled to find the words to reconcile it with the Emperor's plan. He talked about faith and how faith was not the absence of doubt, but the decision to keep standing in the presence of it. I listened. That is something a dreadnought can do that the hagiographies never mention. We listen. We are very good at listening, because we have no choice, because the machine has no mechanism for turning away, for leaving a room, for the small physical gestures that living beings use to signal discomfort or disinterest. When someone stands before a dreadnought and speaks, the dreadnought listens, and the listening is total, absolute, recorded in perfect fidelity by acoustic sensors that miss nothing and forget nothing. And sometimes, rarely, the listening itself is enough. Sometimes a man does not need answers. He needs a witness, someone who will hear him and hold the weight of his words and not flinch. And a dreadnought, for all its limitations, is very good at not flinching. On the second night, Morcrest asked me a question that I had not been asked in centuries. He said, "Ancient, are you afraid?" And I told him the truth. I said, "I have not been afraid since the 7th century of my interment. Fear requires the belief that you have something to lose, and I lost everything a long time ago. What I feel is not fear. It is a weariness that goes deeper than bone, deeper than gene seed, deeper than the foundations of this fortress. I am tired, Chaplain. I am so profoundly, comprehensively, utterly tired that if the Emperor himself appeared before me and offered me rest, true rest, the kind that does not end, I would accept it without hesitation and without regret. But he has not offered, so I continue. And the continuing is not courage, and it is not faith, and it is not the iron will of a son of dawn. It is habit. It is the simple mechanical habit of existing, carried forward by the momentum of 3,000 years. And sometimes I wonder if that is all the Emperor ever needed from us. Not heroes, not legends, just men who could not stop. Morcrest was silent for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the chaplain's trained authority, raw in a way I had not heard from him before. He said, "I think that is the most honest thing anyone in this chapter has ever said to me, and I think it might be the most frightening." I said, "Good. Chaplains should be frightened occasionally. It keeps the sermons interesting." He almost smiled at that. Almost. And then he put his skull helm back on, and the chaplain returned, and Morcrest retreated behind the roll, as all chaplains do, as all space marines do, because the roll is the armor that protects the man from the truth of what he is, and the truth is that even the Emperor's finest are flesh and doubt dressed in ceramite and conviction. There is another thing that happens between the great events, another part of the daily existence that I have never spoken of, because it seemed too small, too personal, too human for a walking relic to acknowledge. The brothers visit, not the officers, not the chaplains or the tech marines or the chapter master, the rank and file, the battle brothers, the assault marines, the devastators, the men who make up the body of the chapter while the officers form its brain. They come to my sepulchre in ones and twos during their rest cycles, when the fortress is quiet and the corridors are empty. They come and they stand before my sarcophagus and they talk. Some ask for advice, some ask for stories, some ask for nothing at all and simply stand in silence, drawing something from my presence that they cannot articulate and that I cannot identify. Some reassurance that they are part of something larger and older and more enduring than their own brief, violent lives. I never turn them away. I cannot turn them away, obviously, because I cannot move unless the tech marines activate my locomotion systems. But even if I could, I would not. Because these visits, these small, private moments of connection between a walking machine and the men it fights beside, are the closest thing to human contact that my existence allows, and they are precious to me in a way that I will never, can never, express through a vox emitter that turns everything I feel into flat, mechanical sound. There was a brother, decades ago now, a young warrior named Thessalan, fresh from the scout company, barely a century into his service. He came to my sepulchre every night for a month. He never spoke. He would stand at attention, perfectly still, for exactly 15 minutes, and then he would leave. On the 31st night, I broke the silence. I asked him, "Why do you come here, brother?" And he said in a voice so quiet that only a Dreadnaught's acoustic sensors could have caught it, "Because you are proof that it is possible to endure. And I need to believe that, Ancient. I need to believe that it is possible to endure, because some days I am not certain that it is." Thessalan died 4 years later, on a nameless moon in a nameless system, holding the line against a Drukhari raiding party. He died well, the reports said. He died as an Ashen Warden should. And I added his name to the count, one more number in the sum, one more brother who had stood before my sarcophagus and drawn something from the presence of a broken man in a box, and I carried his name as I carry all their names, in the only place that still belongs to me, in the memory that degrades, and the mind that wanders, and the soul, if I still have one, that endures. I also experienced during those 2 days the other aspect of daily dreadnought life that the hagiographies consistently omit: boredom. Between the strategic sessions and the librarian reports and the tech marine preparations, There were hours of nothing. Hours of standing in my alcove in the strategium, systems humming, sensors processing empty air, mind churning through the same thoughts in the same circle with the same lack of resolution. Boredom is a torture that would break most men within days. A dreadnought endures it for centuries. We endure it because we have no choice, because the alternative is madness, and I have seen what madness looks like in a dreadnought, and it is something I would not wish on the chapter's worst enemies. Ancient Corvin, the second to last of our dreadnoughts, the one destroyed at Carthanis Secundus before my most recent waking, had begun to show signs of cognitive degradation in his final century. His memories had not merely faded, they had begun to blend, to merge, to create composite recollections that combined elements of different battles, different centuries, different identities. He would speak of battles he had not fought, name brothers who had never existed, describe worlds that were amalgamations of 3 or 4 real worlds compressed into a single, impossible geography. The apothecaries called it temporal conflation. The chaplains called it the long drift. The other brothers called it nothing at all, because to acknowledge that a dreadnought could lose its mind was to acknowledge that the sacred ancestors were not as eternal as the doctrine promised, and that was a doubt too dangerous to voice. I am not drifting. Not yet. My cognitive evaluations, administered by the apothecaries every waking period, consistently register within acceptable parameters. My memories are degraded but internally consistent. My reasoning is intact. My identity is stable, or as stable as identity can be when you are a collection of organs in a jar, piloting a war machine through a reality that grows more hostile with every passing century. But I am aware of the drift, aware of it the way a man standing on a cliff edge is aware of the drop. It is there. It is always there. And one day, perhaps the next waking, perhaps 100 wakings from now, I will step over that edge, and the thing that looks out through these optic sensors will not be Torvaeus anymore, not even the machine that remembers being Torvaeus, but something else, something confused and fragmented and lost, and the brothers will stand before me and ask for wisdom, and receive only noise, but not today. Today I was lucid, today I was sharp. Today, the urgency of the situation had cut through the fog of millennia like a melta-beam through armor plate, and I was more present, more focused, more myself than I had been in centuries. There is a bitter irony in the fact that crisis is the only thing that makes me feel alive. War wakes me, not just physically, but psychologically, pulls me out of the circular thinking and the phantom memories and the existential questioning, and drops me into the immediate, the urgent, the now. In combat, I do not wonder if I am still Torvaeus. In combat, the question is irrelevant, because in combat I am action, I am purpose. I am the Emperor's wrath given 3 meters of walking, shooting, crushing form, and the thinking stops, and the silence fills with thunder, and I am, for those brief, violent, glorious moments, exactly what I was made to be. On the 3rd day, we activated the Spirit Stone. The chamber was full. Chapter Master Dravion stood at the center, flanked by Chaplain Morcrest and Chief Librarian Arction. Behind them, 2 squads of 1st Company veterans in full Terminator armor, storm bolters charged, power fists crackling with barely restrained energy, with a further 3 squads in standard battle plate forming a secondary cordon. The Tech Marines had rigged Auspex arrays throughout the chamber, monitoring every frequency, every wavelength, every possible vector of threat. And I stood at the threshold, because I could not fit through the door, which was built for beings far smaller than a dreadnought, and so my participation in the most significant moment of the Ashen Wardens' history was conducted from the corridor, peering through a doorway like a parent watching a child's first steps from across the room. This I want you to understand, is the daily life of a dreadnought, distilled to its essence. The universe happens around you. History unfolds at a scale you were built to influence and a distance you cannot always close. You are too large, too slow, too cumbersome for the intimate moments, the delicate operations, the turning points that occur in small rooms through narrow doors. You are a hammer in a world that sometimes needs a scalpel, and the hammer stands in the corridor and watches and hopes and can do nothing but wait. Arcteon approached the pylon first. His psychic hood blazed with light as he extended his awareness toward the spirit stone, his face tightening with concentration. The air in the chamber changed. My atmospheric sensors registered a drop in temperature, a shift in electromagnetic readings, a faint subsonic vibration that was felt rather than heard, and that made even the Terminator's mag-locked boots shift slightly on the stone floor. The spirit stone flared. It did not crack or shatter or behave in any way my weapons training had prepared me for. The amber glow intensified, swelled, filled the chamber with warm light that made the noctilith walls shimmer like water, and from the stone, like smoke from a censer, a shape coalesced. A figure, a projection, a psychic echo, a ghost shaped from warp light and ancient memory. Translucent and flickering, but unmistakably present, unmistakably aware. It was Aeldari, tall, impossibly slender, wrapped in robes that shifted like heat haze. Its face was visible, and it was a face that stopped every warrior in that chamber, from the chapter master to the youngest Terminator. Not because it was alien, for every Astar Tess had seen Xenos before, but because it was serene. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, serenity was more alien than any Xenos physiology. Its features carried the characteristic elongation and angular beauty of the Aeldari, but ancient, marked by millennia of silent vigil within the stone, etched with a weariness that I recognized because I carried it myself. And its eyes, luminous and amber like the stone that housed its soul, were looking directly at me. Not at Dravion, not at Arcteon, not at Morcrest or the Terminators, or the Auspex arrays or the door. At me, through the doorway, across the chamber, past every living soul in the room, those eyes found the optic sensors of a dreadnought standing in a corridor, and they held them. And in that moment I heard a voice that did not come through my acoustic sensors, did not register on any Auspex feed, did not exist in any measurable waveform, but spoke directly into whatever was left of my mind, into the organic tissue floating in amniotic fluid inside a ceramite box, inside an adamantium chassis in the belly of a fortress built on the corpse of a world's innocence. The voice said, "You have been faithful, Watcher. You are tired. I am sorry it took so long." And I could not respond because the voice was gentle, and gentleness is not something a dreadnought knows how to process. And the last time anyone had spoken to me with gentleness was so long ago that the memory had eroded completely, and I was left with nothing but the sensation, the faintest imprint of what kindness felt like. And it was devastating in a way that no weapon in the Imperium's arsenal could match. The chamber erupted. Not in violence, not in the way you might expect, but in confusion. In the sharp, barked orders of men trained to respond to threats encountering something that defied the category entirely. Dravion's sword was drawn. The Terminator's storm bolters were raised. Morcrest was reciting the litany of protection, his skull helm broadcasting the words across every vox frequency in the room. And I wanted to tell them to stop. All of them, because I could feel something none of them could, a presence pressing against my consciousness with the delicacy of a mother touching a sleeping child's forehead, and it was not a threat. It was not hostile. It was old and sad and unbearably kind, and it had been waiting, as I had been waiting in a different kind of sarcophagus, in a different kind of sleep, for someone to come and open the door. The projection solidified, gaining definition, the ghostly outline becoming sharper as more psychic energy poured from the spirit stone. It looked at the warriors surrounding it, the bolters and the power fists, and the righteous, terrified fury of an Astar Tess chapter confronting the unknown. And it smiled. Not with malice, not with contempt, with something that looked like recognition, the way you might smile at a child who has built a fortress from rubble and is defending it with all the ferocity their small body can muster. Then it spoke, not in the voice I had heard inside my mind, but aloud, projected through psychic resonance that my acoustic sensors registered as sound, and which carried the lilting cadence of the Aeldari tongue, somehow translated into flawless Gothic. It said, "I am Iltherain. I was a Farseer of Craftworld Lugganath in the age before your Imperium was born. This pylon is one of many scattered across this galaxy by builders whose name even my people have forgotten, anchors driven into the skin of reality to hold back the Sea of Souls. When we found it, we understood its purpose, and I gave my spirit to this stone so that the pylon would endure beyond my body's death, tended by a consciousness that could maintain the resonance. I have slept within it for longer than your species has held dominion over these stars. And now I am roused, because the anchors are failing, and the wound your kind calls the Great Rift has torn open what we spent eons holding shut." Dravion, to his credit, did not fire. He is a practical man, Dravion, a warrior who understands that a drawn sword solves most problems, but not all of them. And this was clearly one of the not all category. He kept his blade raised, kept his brothers in formation. But he listened because chapter masters who do not listen tend to become chapter masters who lead their brothers into catastrophe. And Dravion had survived long enough to know the difference between caution and cowardice. "What thing?" Dravion asked, and Iltherain looked at me again, through the doorway across the chamber, and the voice returned inside my mind, private, intimate, meant only for me. The voice said, "You already know what is happening, Watcher. You have felt it in every battle, in every waking. The barrier between the material realm and the Empyrean is thinner than it has been since the fall of my people. Your kind calls it the Great Rift. We called it the wound that was always coming. This pylon is one of the last functional anchors in this sector, holding the local fabric of reality together while everything around it tears apart. It has been weakening for centuries, and my spirit no longer has the strength to maintain it alone. I need a conduit, a living mind bonded to a machine, existing at the threshold between flesh and something more. I need you." I processed this. It took approximately 4 seconds, which for a cogitator-enhanced consciousness is an eternity, because the implications were so vast and so terrible that even a mind accustomed to processing the horrors of the 41st millennium needed a moment to accommodate them. A being older than humanity, knowledge of how to fight the warp, the Great Rift, the wound in reality that had torn the galaxy in half and unleashed a tide of demonic incursion that had pushed the Imperium to the brink of extinction. And here, beneath a fortress monastery on a volcanic world in a forgotten corner of the segmentum obscurus, was someone who claimed to know how to fix it. My first thought was, this is a trap. My second thought was, this is heresy. My third thought was, this is exactly the kind of thing an Inquisitor would assign a Dreadnought to guard, because Inquisitors think in terms of contingencies that span millennia, and a Dreadnought is the closest thing to immortal that the Imperium can produce. My fourth thought was, I am so tired. And my fifth thought, the thought that emerged after the others had fought it out and settled, was, it does not matter what I believe. It matters what I do. Let me explain what happened next by first explaining what did not happen. There was no grand alliance, no sudden embrace between the ancient Xenos Echo and the Space Marines. Morcrest attempted to declare the Spirit Stone a Xenos abomination and demanded its immediate destruction, and was overruled by Dravion, who was in turn nearly overruled by his own captains, who were in turn calmed by my intervention, which consisted of stating, in the flat, mechanical tone of a dreadnought who is absolutely finished with political disagreements, "We will hear it speak, or we will destroy the stone and let the pylon fail, and face whatever pours through the breach in reality that follows. But we will not stand here arguing while the galaxy burns around us." The words carried weight, not because they were wise, but because they came from me, and I am 3,000 years old, and when the oldest living thing in your chapter tells you to shut up and listen, you shut up and listen. This is one of the few advantages of being a dreadnought. You do not need to be right. You just need to be old enough that everyone assumes you are. Iltherain's echo spoke for 6 hours. 6 hours of information that I recorded in its entirety, and that I will not recount here in detail, because most of it was incomprehensible, couched in the psychotechnical language of the ancient Aeldari, and concepts that even the chief librarian, whose mind was arguably the most flexible in the chapter, struggled to process. But the core of it, the part that mattered, was this. The noctilith pylons, scattered across the galaxy by builders older than even the Aeldari civilization, were not merely physical structures. They were anchors, driven into the fabric of reality at key stress points, and the psychic resonance of the spirit stones embedded within them was what kept the anchors active. When the Cadian pylons fell, the network had been catastrophically weakened. This pylon, this single anchor beneath Carthane, was one of the few remaining nodes holding the local sector of space together, and Iltherain's spirit, diminished by millennia of isolation, could no longer maintain it alone. There was a price. There is always a price. The reinforcement of the pylon required a conduit, a living mind bonded to a mechanical frame, existing at the boundary between organic thought and machine logic, through which the psychic resonance could be channeled and amplified. The conduit needed to be stable, resilient, capable of withstanding forces that would destroy a baseline mind and disrupt conventional technology. It needed to be, in Iltherain's words, a vessel that had already survived the destruction of its original form and been reborn in a new one. A vessel that existed at the boundary between life and death. A vessel that had endured. Everyone in the chamber looked at me. I want to tell you that I hesitated. I want to tell you that there was a moment of doubt, of fear, of the very human instinct to recoil from sacrifice and seek preservation. But the truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that I had been looking for a reason to justify my existence for 3,000 years. And this was the first one that felt adequate. Not war, not the killing of aliens or heretics or the enemies of the Imperium. Those are reasons to function, but they are not reasons to exist. This was a reason to exist. This was the purpose that the Inquisitor had hinted at, the destiny that the chapter had been founded to facilitate, the answer to the question that had haunted me through every waking and every sleeping. Why am I still here? I said, "Tell me what to do." And Iltherain looked at me, and the voice in my mind said, "You will need to let go, not of your duty, not of your loyalty, not of your brothers or your chapter or your emperor, but of the anger, the grief, the 3,000 years of accumulated loss that you carry like armor. You will need to be, for a moment, just a man, just Torvaeus. Not the ancient, not the relic, not the weapon. The man who stood in the phalanx and felt the weight of the future and carried it anyway. Can you do that?" And the answer was, I did not know. Because I did not know if Torvaeus still existed. I did not know if the man inside the machine was still a man or had become something else, something hybrid, something that had spent so long as a dreadnought that the dreadnought was all that remained. I had asked myself this question 1,000 times and never found an answer. And now the answer mattered, not philosophically, but practically, existentially, because the fate of whatever seals held back the darkness depended on a crippled warrior finding the human core beneath 3 millennia of ceramite and iron and loss. The next part is difficult to describe because it did not happen in the physical world. Iltherain's echo did something, a pulse of psychic energy that my optical sensors recorded as a blinding flare from the spirit stone, and then the world fell away. Not the fortress or the chamber or the brothers standing around me, but the dreadnought, the chassis, the sensors, the auspex feeds and the reactor hum, and the constant crushing weight of the machine that had been my body for 3,000 years. It all fell away, and for the first time since the orc war boss tore me in half at the Battle of the Ember Gate, I was standing, on legs, my legs, in a space that was not a room, not a void, not anything with walls or floors or ceilings, but was simply here, a place of warm light and impossible silence, and I was looking at my hands, not a power fist and an assault cannon, but hands with fingers and knuckles and the small scar on my left thumb from a training accident 8 centuries before my interment. I was wearing armor, the yellow of the Imperial fists, which was wrong because the Ashen Wardens wore gray. But the armor was from before, from the founding, from the time when I was new and whole, and the future was something to walk toward rather than something to endure. And I felt. Not data, not sensor readings, not the processed, filtered, machine-translated approximation of sensation that the dreadnought provided. I felt the air on my face, cool and clean, and the weight of the armor on my shoulders, and the solidity of ground beneath my boots, and a dozen other small, insignificant, overwhelming sensations that I had not experienced in 3,000 years. And each one was a detonation, a supernova, an extinction-level event of pure, unfiltered feeling that stripped away every defense I had built, and left me standing in the warm light with tears running down a face that was not real, could not be real, but felt more real than anything I had experienced since the day they sealed me in the box. I wept. There, in whatever space the Farseer's echo had created, or revealed, or simply allowed me to perceive, I wept. And it was not grief, and it was not joy, and it was not relief. It was all of them. It was 3,000 years of compression released in a single, shattering moment of humanity, and the man who wept was Torvaeus. Just Torvaeus, the captain, the warrior, the brother who had stood beside his brothers and faced the dark and had not flinched, and he was still here. He had always been here, buried under the machine, under the grief, under the weight of centuries, but here alive, enduring, as stubborn and immovable as the gene seed of dawn that had made him. And then the work began. I will not describe the process in detail, because I am not certain I understood it. Iltherain's echo guided me, or rather, guided the part of me that was still human, through a series of actions that I perceived as movements, but that were, in reality, something far more profound. I was a conduit, as the Farseer had said. The pylon's resonance moved through me, through whatever spark of humanity remained inside the sarcophagus, and was directed outward, strengthened, renewed, bound into the fabric of reality in patterns that I could feel but not see, like the bass note of a hymn that vibrates in your chest long after the sound has faded. I do not know how long it took. In the real world, in the chamber beneath the fortress monastery, my chassis stood motionless for 47 hours. during which time Techmarine Kyle monitored my systems with the frantic attentiveness of a man watching his most sacred charge teeter on the edge of something he could not measure, and the Terminators maintained their vigil, and Morcrest prayed, and Dravion waited, because chapter masters who cannot wait are chapter masters who make decisions they should not. But the warp does not wait either. I perceived it from within the warm light, a distant tremor, like hearing thunder through water. My chassis sensors, still recording even as my consciousness operated elsewhere, registered it before the librarians did. A spike in warp energy so violent that the electromagnetic readings in the chamber inverted for 3 full seconds. The pylon was being reinforced, yes, but to reinforce it I had to open it, had to loosen the weave of reality around the anchor point, so that the new threads could be woven in. And in that loosening, in that momentary gap between what was and what would be, something found us. Something that had been pressing against the barrier for years, decades, centuries, waiting for exactly this kind of weakness, smelling it the way a predator smells blood. The breach opened 20 meters from my chassis. I know this because my auspex logged it. I know the exact dimensions, 4.2 meters across, ragged at the edges, vomiting light the color of bruises, and screaming with a sound that my acoustic sensors recorded at 214 decibels, and that Morcrest would later describe simply as wrong. Demons poured through, not an army, not a legion, a hunting pack, perhaps 24 Neverborn. Lesser things, flickering pink and blue horrors that tumbled into the material world like newborns, shrieking and clawing and burning with warp fire that turned the stone floor to glass where it touched. And I could do nothing. I want you to understand what that means for a dreadnought. I am a weapon. I am 3 meters of ceramite and adamantium built for the singular purpose of killing the enemies of the Emperor. And I was standing 7 meters from a demonic breach, and I could not move, could not fire, could not raise the power fist or spin the assault cannon, or take a single grinding step toward the things pouring out of a wound in reality. Because I was the conduit, and if I stopped, if the process was interrupted, the pylon would fail entirely, and the breach that had produced 24 horrors would become a breach that swallowed the fortress. Iltherain's voice cut through the warm light like a blade. Do not stop. Whatever happens, do not stop. And I did not stop. I stood there, locked in the ritual, while my brothers fought and bled and died around me. The Terminators hit the breach first. Storm bolters roared, mass reactive rounds detonating inside demonic flesh that unraveled rather than tore. Each kill dissolving the Neverborn back into the warp in a burst of sickly light. Dravion was among them, his power sword carving burning arcs through the press of horrors, each stroke precise and economical. A chapter master who fought like a line sergeant because the situation demanded killing, not command. Morcrest was at his side, Crozius Arcanum blazing with disruption field energy, the litany of hate pouring from his vox emitter in a continuous stream that seemed to cause the demons physical pain, their forms flickering and destabilizing where the words struck them. The Battle Brothers in standard plate formed a firing line in the corridor behind my immobile chassis, bolters hammering disciplined volleys into anything that broke past the Terminators. 3 brothers died. Brother Kalin was pulled into the breach itself, dragged through by claws made of solidified malice, and was gone before anyone could reach him. 2 Terminators, veterans whose names I later added to the count, were overwhelmed by a knot of horrors that climbed their armor like vermin and burned through the seals at their gorgets, the warp fire finding flesh beneath the tactical dreadnought plate. They died on their feet. They died fighting. They died 7 meters from a dreadnought who could have saved them with a single sweep of his power fist and who did nothing. because doing nothing was the mission. And the mission was more important than 3 lives, and knowing that did not make it easier. It has never made it easier. The breach closed at the 39th hour. It did not close because the demons were defeated, though they were. It closed because the pylon was winning, because the resonance moving through me was stitching reality shut faster than the warp could tear it open, and at the 39th hour, the balance tipped, and the wound sealed with a sound like tearing silk played in reverse, and the last horror dissolved mid-shriek, and the chamber fell silent, except for the breathing of exhausted warriors and the steady hum of a pylon that was, for the first time in centuries, strong. When it was over, the warm light faded, and the hands faded, and the face and the tears and the sensation of air on skin faded, and I was back in the chassis, back in the machine, back in the sarcophagus with its amniotic fluid and its neural links and its constant, flat, data-driven perception of a world experienced through sensors rather than senses. But something was different. Something had changed, not in the machine, but in the man inside it. The grief was still there. The loss was still there. The 3,000 years of accumulated memory and pain, and the particular exquisite agony of being a consciousness trapped in a box were all still there. But they were lighter, not gone, not healed, just lighter, the way a burden becomes lighter when you understand why you are carrying it, when the weight has a purpose and the purpose is worthy. Iltherain was gone. The spirit stone at the pylon's base was dark, its amber light extinguished, the psychic echo that had dwelt within it for millennia finally spent. The Aeldari runes on the walls had stopped moving, stopped glowing, become merely markings, ancient and illegible and inert. But the pylon itself hummed, steady and deep, a vibration I could feel through the floor, through my chassis, through whatever remained of my bones. It was stable. Whatever the Farseer spirit and I had done together, it had worked. The anchor held. The local fabric of reality was reinforced, and the screaming tide of the Great Rift, at least in this forgotten corner of the segmentum obscurus, would beat against a wall it could not breach. Dravion asked me what had happened. I told him what I could, the parts that translated into words and concepts that Astar Tess understood. The pylon, the conduit, the reinforcement of the anchor. The rest I kept private because the rest was mine, the only thing that was truly mine. The memory of standing in the light with my own hands and my own face and feeling the air on skin that no longer existed, and I would not share that with anyone, not even the chapter master, not even if the Inquisition itself demanded it. Because some things are sacred in a way that has nothing to do with the Emperor or the Imperium or the endless war, and everything to do with being human. And being human is the one thing I refuse to surrender, even now, even after everything, even entombed in a metal tomb until the stars burn out. The aftermath was predictable. The Inquisition eventually responded to Dravion's messages 3 months after the fact, with a curt acknowledgement and a directive to seal the lower vault permanently, which Dravion did with considerably more thoroughness than the original seal. Morcrest conducted a full spiritual audit of the chapter, found nothing heretical, and filed a report that would be read by approximately no one. The Terminators returned to their duties. The Tech Marines sealed the chamber. Life, such as it was, returned to normal. And I returned to my sepulchre. That is where I am now. That is where this account is being recorded, in the quiet hours before they put me back to sleep, before the stasis cycle begins, and the dreams return, and the time between wakings swallows another generation of brothers who will live and die without ever knowing that a walking coffin in the lower vaults once stood in a place of warm light and wept with hands that did not exist. Tekmarin Kyle is preparing the final rites. I can hear him through my acoustic sensors, moving through the adjoining chamber with the careful, reverent movements of a man performing sacred work. The incense is burning. My atmospheric sensors tell me its chemical composition. They do not tell me what it smells like. But for the first time in 3,000 years, I do not mind. That is the thing about being a dreadnought that nobody tells you, because nobody who has not been one could possibly understand. It is not the loss that defines you. It is not the grief, the isolation, the endless grinding sameness of a life measured in maintenance rites and ammunition counts. It is not the battles or the kills or the enemies crushed beneath the power fist that was once a hand. What defines you is the choice. The choice to keep going, the choice to wake up when they wake you and say yes when they ask you to fight, and walk when the walking is slow and painful and pointless. The choice to be a dreadnought, truly be it, not as a sentence but as a service, not as a prison but as a post, the last post, the final duty that a warrior can offer when every other duty has been exhausted. I am Torvaeus. I am the last ancient of the Ashen Wardens. I am 3,217 years old, give or take a century. I have killed more enemies of the Emperor than some chapters have brothers. I have watched 42 dreadnoughts fall and 416 brothers die, and 19 million civilians dissolve into nothing on a world I was too slow to save. I have carried a secret that I forgot and remembered and wish I could forget again. I have stood in a place that should not exist with hands that do not exist, and wept tears that should not have been possible. And tomorrow, or a century from tomorrow, they will wake me again, and they will ask me how many, and I will add the number to the sum, and I will carry it, because that is what I do. That is what I am. They never tell you about the dreaming. But I will tell you this. Tonight, when the stasis cycle pulls me under and the machines still and the world goes dark and the dreams begin, I will not dream of hands. Not this time. This time, for the first time in 3,000 years, I will dream of something else. I do not know what, but I know it will be different. And for a dreadnought, different is the closest thing to hope there is. Even in death, I still serve. But I will tell you a secret that the hagiographies leave out, a truth that 3 millennia of war and loss and endurance have carved into whatever is left of my soul. It is not death, not anymore. It is something else, something that does not have a name, something between the machine and the man, between the sleeping and the waking, between the coffin and the sky. And it endures, it endures.